Welcome, everybody, and thank you for joining us for another Wednesday evening broadcast. I have tonight as guest with me Robert Farrell, a good friend of mine who has also been involved in the study of extra-biblical, extra-canonical texts for a very long time. And I first learned about him through one of my listeners. She had sent me some of his videos and some of the work that he had done, bringing forth some information on YouTube, which is one of the places he does work through to bring forth the different pieces of information he has brought forth. And he's got quite a compilation and assortment, myriad scriptures available, a lot that people don't know about, and some that I was even surprisingly newly introduced to. He's also an author of several books, I believe, but we'll get him to tell you about that. And he has also compiled into like a super Bible, and all of these different extra-biblical and extra-canonical texts that were seemingly left out, that have been stripped away. And like one of the things, just to introduce some of his work, is one of the things that I was always greatly interested in when reading the original canon, the King James Version of the Bible, and just the Old and the New Testament, was why there was not very much detail or much accounting at all in narrative as to the early life of Christ, and also of Mary, and what led up to the circumstances and the situation of his birth, how Mary was betrothed, what led to the virgin birth of Christ, and how all that unfolded. And so that was something that I was always very interested in. And having studied many of the extra-biblical books, that is part of some of the outside source that you can find to detail and to elucidate some of the early life of Christ, including his infancy, his young adult years. And there are actually several stories, many, and that for those that are interested, like I wanted to know everything that I could about Christ and his life, and especially, whether he was absolutely God incarnate, especially, through the virgin birth, the details of all that. And these stories seem to confirm that basis and confirm that fact. And so for those that don't know about the infancy gospel, the Protevangelium of James, there are a couple different sets written by a couple of different apostles. James, the half-brother of Christ, who was also the head of the Jerusalem church when it was formed and founded after his death. And so we'll get Robert to elaborate on some of these texts, and also to introduce you on a lot of things that maybe you have not heard about. And certainly for those that are still new to the study of the scripture, and those sources that are outside of the agreed upon canon, he'll be able to open your eyes and broaden your horizons in that way. Robert, brother, are you there?
Yeah, I am.
Well, we appreciate you taking the time to join us this evening, and because I know you're a very busy person, and you've got your work and your job and your family, and so, but I would like you to just, if you could, initially give people kind of an idea of where your information can be found, the books that you've written, and how they can find your material, and also, just introduce them to some of the stuff that you've done. I know that it's quite a bit of material, but maybe some of your most popular uploads.
Okay. Well, first of all, as far as my book writing or whatever, I really have compiled only two major works. And that would be the very first series of tracts that I wrote, which I've entitled The Guidebook for the Elect. And that's available for download at the website, which is www.scriptural-truth.com. .com, and you have to put the dash in there. I want to say he's got it listed under 3 Peter, but that's one of the tracks. But basically, well, the way this all started was just kind of out of curiosity. My studies I don't consider to be a departure from the Bible. In fact, I had the very same sort of trepidation as most people do about these books at first. I did a little research, and the books that I read all sort of indicated that these things were inferior and that they were later works, and just a dubious background. And so, but as I read the Bible, it became clear to me that so many people who wrote the Bible would make reference to extra-canonical literature. And in the Old Testament, of course, you hear about the book of Yasher and Edo the seer, and these were things that I sort of noticed as I first started reading the Bible from cover to cover. It occurred to me that these were books that we no longer had access to. Because I would look into them just sort of as I read, and I found out that these books were lost, and I felt a sense of loss, like as if, well, it would be nice if we could just go and read these books and see what these books had to say, but they were no longer with us, and it sort of bothered me. I felt like I had been a little bit ripped off, I suppose, just feeling that somebody somewhere had dropped the ball because there were things that we no longer had. But I was sort of able to stomach it a little bit, thinking to myself, well, maybe they were for their time or for a specific reason or whatever. They weren't necessarily for our time and place and so on and so forth. And so, being that the Bible was full of prophets who, just went out into, to the Israelites and gave them messages for their time, I thought, well, certain things were meant to be preserved and certain things were meant not to be preserved, but it was all just part of the mix. And so I kind of accepted it for a while. But when I got to Jude, I was sort of confronted by something that really threw that whole notion off. And that was that not only had he called him a prophet, but that he had applied that prophecy to his own day. And that he had mentioned that the prophecy was ancient, that he referred to Enoch in verse 14 of his letter as the seventh from Adam. And I had also, and I did look into it before I actually knew that there was an apocryphal book called the Book of Enoch, because my footnotes in my particular Bible didn't indicate that what the quote actually was or where it came from. It sent me back to Genesis, but it didn't tell me that this was an apocryphal book, but it still sort of bothered me, so I kept looking around in different Bibles, and sure enough, I found kind of a more scholarly study Bible, and it indicated to me that this was an apocryphal book. And it told me what it was, and it told me a little bit about it, and it kind of made me mad in a way, because I felt like I had been misled by the bogus, if you will, reference to Genesis. That there was more to the story, it was common knowledge, and that they wouldn't tell me just that one little thing, the truth, got me thinking, should I really trust these people? Because it clearly would have been something that, had it been me, I would have felt very guilty and dishonest for not providing at least factual information for people to look up. And so, it sort of always kind of stuck out in my mind, and I thought about it and thought about it and thought about it, and it just sort of began to unravel that what had happened was that there was something like a plan on the part of the compilers of the New Testament to reintroduce these books at some point in time, because there was a structure. There was a relationship, for example, between Jude and the second letter of Peter, which again, it bothered me still that here was a book that Second Peter was written around, and it was relegated to a place between 3rd John and Revelation. And that to me was another sign of intellectual dishonesty on the part of not only the compilers, but of modern-day Christians as well, because you would think that, they were straightforward, truth-seeking, honest people, that they would just do a straightforward, honest study and exegesis of the two and try to get down to just what that relationship was. And I've never really read anything anywhere where anybody just actually agreed with Jude that he was the second from Adam, that anybody just actually agreed that he was a prophet because Jude said he was. I never found a satisfactory commentary that explained just what the relationship was between 2 Peter and Jude. And so it sort of became something like a mission of mine to try to get to the bottom of just why all these things happen. And the more I looked into it, the more it just sort of kept on happening, that I kept on finding out more and more and more things, that had been hidden from us, that we had been deprived of. And, all that just sort of bothered me. And so I just started looking into it. I started reading these books just to kind of see what they were about. If they were really as bad as all that, I should be able to find out where they are, period. And so I listened to these books. I read them out on the tape just for my own sake because I wanted to get a familiarity with them. And so I wound up reading literally, it's got to be over 100 pages worth of this information. I listened to it. And suddenly, just sort of out of the blue, I started getting insights about these things that, they just seemed logical, but at the same time, they were very intuitive. Like, I wouldn't know where the thought came from. It just would happen. It would pop into my head. And I didn't know whether it was just my own head or whether I was just delusional about it or whatever. And so I started trying to line these documents up. The gospel material, like you mentioned, there was the birth of Mary, there was the proto-evangelion of James, there was all this stuff that I wanted to see if it lined up, if I could sort of harmonize them like a gospel harmony. Because I figured if there was that big a disagreement between them, they should not fit. But if they fit together, then that indicated to me anyway that there was something perhaps supernatural about it. So I quickly just sort of made copies of books and I cut them out with scissors and I pasted them onto little pieces of paper in columns and I put like with like and I tried to order them the way they were. And what was helpful about that is that by using the scissors and the cut and the paste method, I knew that nothing really was lost because there weren't extra pieces. And so it made it clear to me that there was some kind of relationship there. So I thought that I would just follow through with it and just compile an entire gospel that way. And so what resulted ultimately was a book that I first entitled Living Jesus, Living Legend, which I really didn't like because I didn't like referring to the material as legendary material. By the time I got done with it, it seemed a whole lot less like legend and a whole lot more like the basic background that you would need to have in order to study early Christianity. That it sort of represented the totality of Christian tradition, at least that had been left to us. And it helped tremendously to understand other things because you had a much broader, deeper, and wider understanding and appreciation for other documents that you would read that were clearly influenced by these books. So anyway, in any case, just having this knowledge and just having the background, you read a lot of other documents of the period that betray a kind of familiarity with these texts. And so it brings into question, just why it is that these books were so popular and were believed. And, if the scholars are to be believed, it's just because these people didn't know what they were talking about or what they were looking at, or that they were simple or things hadn't settled down or whatever. But anyway, the fact that they do sort of fit together convinced me, ultimately, that there really was something to this, that there might just be one spirit behind it. So I proceeded kind of from that point to just kind of receive insights that I really can't explain. They came from it, just were insights. And one of them was about the relationship between Jude and 2 Peter, which I wrote a tract about called the Synoptic Epistles, and I have that available on my YouTube channel, which is Apocryphile 1970. That's APOCRYPHILE 1970.
Hey, Rob. Hey, can you give your website information out one more time? So people in the chat room were asking. And then I want to bring up one other point, and then we'll get back to your testimony.
Okay, sounds fine. Again, the YouTube site is YouTube user Apocryphile 1970. And my other website, which is run by YouTube user JesusLove723, that is www.scriptural-truth.com. There you're going to find all the PDFs and MP3s and links to some of my videos there. So you can download, for instance, the Super Gospel there, and you can download it in MP3 format, and you can download it in PDF format. For those of you who are interested in the subject, I have provided the sources under the headers so that you can check and see for yourself just whether or not, these books actually fit together, that they're sequenced and they're integrated properly. You can see for yourself. It's an interesting little exercise in discovery, to say the least. To see these things sort of open up before you. Anyway, so I invite everybody to go and to check it out and to download and to take advantage of the resources that are there. I've been kind of working on this sort of off and on for over 20 years, so there's just a massive amount of information that's there, and, so it's all there for you to enjoy.
I want to make a commentary here, and then I'm going to get you to elaborate a little bit on that super gospel. But before doing so, is that, Susan is asking, is that scriptural-truth.com, or how would people find it?
Well, that's right. It's just scriptural-truth.com.
Okay, scriptural.com without the S. Okay. All right, great. Well, for people that are kind of new to the subject of as far as the extra biblical, extra canonical texts and all those that are out there, just know that there are thousands of stories, thousands of pieces of scripture, thousands of lost books, forbidden books, forgotten books, massive different compilations, even like with the recent coming of light, the Dead Sea Scrolls. There was just recently an article about a whole another group of Dead Sea Scroll texts having been located and found in in another one of the caves. I believe it was like 15 different books. And so there's books being found all the time. Even the Nag Hammadi Codices, which was found in 1946, that's another huge compilation. And then you have the things like the Pseudepigrapha and the Apocryphal, and books, even just books that are mentioned within the Bible that we no longer have. We do have books like the Book of Jasher and the Book of Jubilees, but there are also mentions in the Old Testament and the New Testament, books like the Book of the Wars of the Lord, which I have a 3-book set that is commentary on it, but I don't actually have the text itself, which I, have wanted to read for a very long time. There's mention of a book of songs, the Chronicles of the Kings of Israel, Chronicles of the Kings of Judah, the book of Shemaiah the prophet, of Iddo the seer. There's so many, the Acts of Solomon, the Annals of King David, the book of Samuel the seer, the book of Nathan the prophet, the book of Gad the seer, prophecy of Hijah, the book of the kings of Judah and Israel. And these are just some. There's a long list of texts that are mentioned within the Old and the New Testament that we don't even have, that would be a wonderful resource if we did have these books to peruse and to study from and to read from. I think they would provide great detail into what we already have introspection upon. Just a few others. The story of the Book of the Kings, Acts of Uzziah, the vision of Isaiah, Acts of the Kings of Israel, the sayings of the seers, laments for Josiah. There's so many different texts. And these are just the ones that are mentioned within what is the agreed upon and official canon. And there's so many, even in studying the Nag Hammadi codices and the Dead Sea Scrolls, there are texts that are mentioned in those texts that we no longer have, that we are not privy to. And so for people, that are stringent, that are dedicated to only studying the 66-book canon, to me, it's like you're limiting yourself in such a way as to, only studying one book of what is the official canon, when there's so many other texts out there. And that's just in the Judeo-Christian history and tradition. And I'm not even talking about I've studied the Sumerian teachings, the Egyptians, the Celtic, all of the different mythologies, the ancient mysteries, all the ancient texts that I can find. And there's so much information out there available to us, especially now that, we're really the last generation, the fig tree generation, and all this insight and all these texts and all this wisdom is being made available to us, especially with the incredible access of the internet and being able to just keyword search all this material. It's amazing, and why anybody would not utilize the internet as a tool to introspect and look into some of this as source material for extra confirmation on what we already know about is just beyond me. But that being said, Robert, we're going to go to break here in about 5 minutes. But before we do, if you would comment on what I just said, and then also talk a little bit more about the super gospel that you have worked on, and as to what other books you have made available through that as a resource material.
Okay. Well, just to kind of complement what you just said, now all of those things were impressive to me, but as I studied the New Testament, what became clear to me as I researched it further and further and further, that not only are there references to books that we no longer have, such as in, for example, the book of Matthew, the Gospel of Matthew, it mentions that he moved to Nazareth so that he could be called a Nazarene. But again, that doesn't occur in the Old Testament, so it implies that this is coming from some other source. Also, in the book of James, where he mentions that, know ye not that the Scripture saith, that do you think that the Scripture saith in vain that the Spirit within us lusteth envy? which is also not found in the Old Testament. So clearly you have writers within the New Testament which are still, in their day and age, not recognizing a canon when a canon had more or less been established. When you read in the Gospel of Thomas, for example, it says 24 prophets spoke in Israel, and they all pointed to you. That indicates a canon. You see what I'm saying? There's a canon early on.
Right.
So for these people to be quoting outside of that canon at an early time in Christianity, when there was the concept of a canon, means that they are speaking and acting and writing in defiance of any tradition that supports the canon. You know, the statement in 2 Corinthians that the devil himself manifests as an angel of light is a reference to the life of Adam and Eve, which we still have and can read.
Right.
The statement in 2 Peter that of these men the proverb is true that a dog returns to its own vomit, which is from Proverbs, and that a sow, once washed, goes back to her wallowing in the mud. Now, that is a reference to the story of Ahikar. That's chapter 7, verse 27 of the story of Ahikar, which we still have. So any notion that, well, these prophets were just for their own day and age is kind of shattered, but when you recognize that the New Testament writers don't have that particular viewpoint, they don't accept the canon that we accept. They weren't limited by to say that the Scripture said it does not say anything that the Spirit that dwelleth within us lusteth to envy. Is to call that in Scripture because he uses the word Scripture to say that that Jesus lived in Nazareth to fulfill the prophecy that said that he shall be called a Nazarene means that there's a fulfillment of some prophecy that we don't have. You see, so they're using these terms, Scripture, and to fulfill prophecy, and that Enoch the seventh from Adam prophesied. You see, they're using it in terms of prophecy. So when you agree with the New Testament,
all right, Robert.
Okay, good.
We'll be right back. Welcome back, everybody. I'm your host, Zen Garcia. This is Momentary Zen, and I have as guest with me tonight Robert Farrell, who has been bringing forth a lot of information for a number of years now on YouTube and other places, leading to and connected to a lot of the extra-biblical, extra-canonical sources. And for those that have been following and been avid listeners of my radio programs for the past number of years, you know that I have been a great student and a great proponent of each one of you and all of you listeners out there, individuals, to do your own homework and to open yourself to the possibility of those things that are written about and referenced in all of the myriad texts. Because it's my opinion that in having a background in a lot of these different texts, and once you expose yourself to many of them, a lot of what does not make sense within the Word and within the Gospel, a lot of the secrets that are even right before you, but yet veiled to those that have little discernment onto the esoteric side of the Word and the Gospel. Things like even with the references to the Canaanite bloodline, the seed of the woman and the seed of the serpent, the separation of the wheat and the tares, the goat and the sheep, even those things that are spoken about as far as pre-existence, predestination, the fallen angels and the giants, which is a wide array of people are now being led to the study of Scripture just to get more detail and to get more information on the fallen angels, and not just from the book of Enoch, even though, in my opinion, the books of Enoch that we do have provide great detail as to the account of the fallen watchers, and also to the rebel angels and the prior times and those things that are connected to their presence. And it's also my opinion that these issues and these topics, even though they're little understood and not very well represented in the mainstream churches by those that are, granted authority and that so many look for and look to for answers and guidance and direction, that not many of them truly have an understanding on these esoteric issues. But many people are now looking and trying to understand about some of this stuff that we've been talking about for years. And, even Christ referenced in Matthew 24 and Mark 13 and Luke 21, he said, as in the days of Noah, so shall it be in the days of the second coming of the Son of Man. And that our being the fig tree generation, that when we see the nation of Israel gathered together again and the people brought back into the land, that this would be the generation that would see the unveiling and the unfolding of all these things, and that this generation would not pass away until all things be fulfilled. He also said, unless the days be shortened, there should be no flesh left. And so the times that we are living in, the times that we are approaching, are going to be very critical. But the critical statement that is associated to, as in the days of Noah, and why it was that the flood was brought upon the planet in the first place, has, in my opinion, a large part to do with the presence of the watchers and the interdiction of the fallen watchers. They're mating, the sons of God mating with the daughters of man, and bringing forth a race of giants that became those that, raised and endeavored to bring up the cultures and civilizations that they oppressed in these pagan and abominable ways, with rituals where they were sacrificing their children and involved in blood sacrifice and cannibalism and these kind of atrocious behaviors that, the Father, when Michael and Uriel and Raphael and some of the archangels, as referenced in the book of Enoch, when they came to see what was going on the planet, and they took an accounting of all the bloodshed and the murder and the introduction of weapons to humanity and some of the other mysteries of the heavens, some of the secrets of the heavens, these kind of things led to the divergence and the bloodshed and the insanity and the chaos that we find even prevalent in this day and age. So it's my opinion that it's very important to understand exactly what Christ was referring to, as in the days of Noah, because we are going to be dealing with those kind of things even now, and those kind of things are again happening, and that we're going to be witness to a lot of spiritual anomaly that will not be easily explained. But when you look to some of these extra biblical texts and to their references, you find that they say a great deal about the powers, the principalities, the rulers of darkness, wickedness in high places, and the archons and the fallen angels. And so, Robert, I'm going to get you to comment on that, and then we're going to go into, again, the super gospel and the different books that you compiled together there as resource, so that people will know about, the two books that you've written, and also where people can go to buy them or, download them or find them, so that they can read more into some of these texts that have been left out.
Okay. Well, first of all, as to the fallen angels, as to the watchers, it's like you said, that these evil spirits, and it does say in the book of Enoch that these will be called evil spirits upon the earth, and that Jesus would go around casting out these evil spirits and demons, and these are the same entities. And when, for example, if you take for granted that the book of Enoch is genuine, it explains a lot in the world that you see around you. You see today, you see fallen angel imagery just everywhere. Black wings, black crosses on T-shirts and hats and those kinds of things. There seems to be a kingdom of darkness, and there's plenty of empirical evidence of that. And there's plenty of empirical evidence in the Bible to indicate that there has been a cover-up of this book and that it's been pretty thorough, pretty systematic. And reading, for example, getting back to Jude and 2 Peter, it's entirely possible to put those two books together and restore the book of Enoch basically from logicking the passages and putting them together and actually just looking and seeing what is there before your face, because it explains why they took those books and separated them. And it explains why this whole other theology came about, because there has been this cover-up. Because when these people infiltrated the church, and they did, these are the wicked people that are spoken of in Jude verse 4, and also echoed in 2 Peter, that these people have infiltrated the church. They've taken over the place of the apostles. One of them, for example, mentioned by name, Diotrephes in 3 John, which is interesting, too, just as an aside, because by placing Jude between 3 John and Revelation, you sort of interrupt the flow between these false apostles who won't even accept the apostle John into their church, or to allow his people to interact with John's people. And then the next thing you know, he's on Patmos. It kind of makes you wonder what that progression was between the church rejecting John and John ending up on Patmos. And by putting Jude there, you also obscure the fact that it's to be read along with 2 Peter, because the relationship between those two letters is very deep. And it's really complete. In fact, if you read Jude, the first thing he says is, I first wrote unto you, I was going to write to you of our common salvation. That is as opposed to our individual salvation, right? We ask ourselves, well, are we saved? That's individual salvation. But do we ask, what about all of us? What about all of us prevailing? Well, when you read 2 Peter, he seems to be filling in that gap. He gives it to you very formulaically. He says, to faith add knowledge, and to knowledge self-control, and et cetera. And then he goes on to say that if you do all these things, that an entrance to the kingdom, that is to say, parenthetically, our common salvation, will be open unto you. And so the book is designed to open that door. That the door that has been shut and no one can open it, that God is opening it. And once it is open now, no one can shut it. That he, Jesus, is himself the door. He is himself the gate, and he is himself the Word. Therefore, the Word is open and the Word is shut. Things are sealed for a certain time in order to be revealed in due time. You read this also very first thing in the book of Enoch, that these are the words of the blessing of Enoch, wherewith he blessed the elect and righteous, who will be living in the day of tribulation, when all the wicked and godless are being removed. So again, you have agreement, in a sense, between the purpose of Enoch to be withheld from us until the end of time, until the time when these people are to be removed, and the mystery sealed up and bound up in a mystery within the New Testament, that once you put those things together, you can open up that door of the Scriptures. You can go in and enter into the kingdom, because the way has been, the entrance has been placed for you, and this is the entrance. And by knowing this stuff and thereby having the faith, in other words, he's tapping into the faith that Christians already have, if they're brave enough to believe their own prophets, which they typically don't. Because you have very people defending Jude, as they should. You have very few people expressing the truth, such as when Paul refers to an extra-canonical scripture. You don't see that in footnotes. When you don't see those kinds of things that scholars know, you know that they're hiding it from you, and that they're lying to you. And I hate to use words like that, but that is in fact what they're doing. Because the more you read into scholarly tomes, the more you realize they know this stuff perfectly well. But the common man, the person on the street, your average Christian, is being taken advantage of for, their money and for their time, and because they're a little bit naive in the sense that they believe what they're told, when they should believe God instead, which they don't. But if you do take Jude to mean what he says, that he regards Enoch as the seventh from Adam. And remember, he's already quoted, for example, the assumption of Moses. When he says that Enoch also prophesied, what is that also with reference to? That also is with reference to the assumption of Moses. That also is with reference to Moses as well. So, I'm saying it's very inclusive what he said. It isn't strictly referring to Enoch. But getting back to Enoch, these evil spirits wander the earth, and they know that there is a time. When Jesus crosses the Sea of Galilee and is encountered by the demoniac, or the two demoniacs, the story varies. But in any case, he's confronted by this demoniac, and the assertion is, or the question is, have you come to destroy us before the time? So he indicates to you that these people have some sense that there is a time, and they know that they're not there yet. Okay, and the bottom line is he sends them into a herd of swine, and Mark mentions that there were about 2,000 of them, and then they're swallowed up by the abyss. Right? So the abyss is something like their judgment. So when he says if you come to judge us before the time, and then that drowning in the sea is in effect an indicator of their future judgment, and that there are about 2,000 pigs, it means that there are about 2,000 years until they are judged. Because the answer is bound up in the same pericope. The question is asked, are you here before the time? The question in your mind should be, well, how much before the time are they? And the answer is given that there are about 2,000 pigs until the time of judgment, which, in my opinion anyway, indicates that there are 2,000 years left, or about 2,000 years, because no one knows the day or the hour, so we can't be that precise, but we're close. And, you ask yourself, well, what is the day that we're living in is close to 2,000 years from now, give or take. So, we could very easily be on this threshold. In fact, it's really hard to say, using that logic, that we aren't on that threshold. And the fact that these kinds of things are becoming obvious to us at this point in time, and the fact that the watchers and the demons out there are kind of making their moves. They're becoming more and more evil. The world is becoming so evil that it's basically all evil all the time. And so that's a secondary line of evidence that because we are becoming all evil all the time, as it was in the days of Noah, that we are again, if you will, in a time that is as the days of Noah. And by eating and drinking and, getting married and marrying off and all that, that all kind of has a parabolic significance too, but I don't really have time to go into that. But basically, there's every reason to believe that these mysteries are to be revealed in our time. And there's every reason to believe that we are going to face resistance from the church and from, the powers that be, because they are more interested in saving face and, frankly, their own bacon, as opposed to the truth. And, it's just you want to bring it to church, you want to bring it to the believers, and you try to bring it to the church, and you try to bring it to the believers. But I think that when Jesus said that the tax collectors and the prostitutes go in before the scribes and the Pharisees or whatever, that it's a lot like saying that that's what we're going to have to do. That he's kind of going after the nothings and the nobodies because they don't have a vested interest. And, they're much more likely to be disinterested and to look for actual truth rather than to defend some tradition or some belief that they've been taught.
Yeah, so, let me make a comment here real quick, Robert. Two things just really quick. He identified, the Pharisees as the Sadducees, those that were of the church authority. He said that, I know you are of Abraham's seed, but ye seek to kill me. And he said that you are of your father, the devil. And a lot of the Catholic Church and those councils that have taken and stripped away, and that have organized the canon, that have reduced the texts that have been available to the masses, that have controlled the outpouring of information even to the mainstream audiences and to the lay people, the common people, that they have been aligned to what we would consider in this day and age as being the New World Order, and that there is an organized conspiracy, the Sons of Belial, the Sons of Darkness, the Brotherhood, the Freemasons, the secret societies, that these groups have been working in tangent together to control information and to keep, even with like the Vatican Library, all those texts that are down there that we don't have access to. And they are trying to keep us in darkness. Even the fact that the Book of Enoch was disappeared for so long until it finally became available again by the grace of God, found in the Ethiopic Bible. And there's so many texts like that now, with the advent of the internet that we have access to, and the Spirit is being poured out on us. But another thing, as far as the story of the demons, it's interesting also that even though, many of the people did not recognize Christ as Lord and as King, the demons knew exactly who he was. And they absolutely recognized him, and they said, as you stated earlier, have you come to torment us before the time? So most definitely that says to me that they know that they only have a certain amount of time, and that when that time is up, that judgment will ensue, and that the tares will be gathered for the fire, and that the harvest will ensue, the wheat will be collected for the barn, and that time is absolutely that we're on the precipice, and we are that last generation. I also think that the fallen angels and Lucifer and Satan as the adversary, the forces of evil, that when the fig tree bloomed and the nation of Israel again came to be, even though that was pushed by the Rothschild and by the Rothschild money and by the United Nations, which is just an extension of the globalist control and the transnationalists and the elect. But still, it was a fulfillment of prophecy, and that when that event occurred and that happened, the agenda of the New World Order was pushed into hyperdrive, and that since 1947, we have had all of the weirdness, as far as the ancient aliens and the connection to the strong delusion and the abduction phenomena, and then also the sources, these materials coming to light, like the Nag Codices, the Dead Sea Scrolls. There was recently an article that spoke about a series of 70 texts, iron books that were also found in the Jordan Valley that are being deciphered now, and to this other collection of Dead Sea Scrolls that were recently found. And so, absolutely, it's my opinion that the agenda is being pushed from both sides. Not only the New World Order and the wickedness of rulers of darkness pushing their agenda, but also the Sons of Light. In one of the Dead Sea Scrolls, it talks about the wars between the Sons of Light and the Sons of Darkness, and that we would see the fulfillment of all that. And all that is also occurring in our lifetime. So there is a lot going on, a lot of information, a flood of information coming to light. The thing with the last Pope, and that whole prophecy of St. Malachi. We'll be right back, everybody. Welcome back, everybody. I'm your host, Zen Garcia, and I do want to remind everybody that Revolution Radio is the largest commercial-free, listener-supported radio network on the planet and the internet, and that we would not be able to do what we do without you, and so we appreciate all of you taking the time to join us, the various hosts, and those of us that have gathered together as a driving force for truth and utilizing the platform that Nighthawk has put together in the past few years to bring out all of this information and the various different hosts that cover the various topics and various issues, that we are all uniquely different, but we are bringing information that could not be found many other places. Also, been asked to let you know that the YouTube site where most people were going to find the downloads and to get the archives of the various shows, that has been changed. It is no longer a Revolution Radio on YouTube, but now it's Revolution Talk Radio. And so I ask everybody to subscribe and to change your subscription so that you can find all the newly archived and the newly updated programs. And also, we will be taking calls. And I'll get Susan to give out the call-in number here in just a couple minutes. But I do want to, also remind those of you that can, in order for us to stay commercial-free and to stay listener-supported, we do need your assistance. And for those of you that can and have capacity to do so, to please go to freedomslips.com and click on the donate button and to give whatever you can to support the network and to help Nightwalk continue on with, the whole endeavor of getting us on satellite radio so that we can reach millions of listeners worldwide and to continue the growth and evolution of Revolution Radio. And so with that, I also would like to let people know that Nighthawk also has available, for those that might be interested, there are compilations of discs being made of the different shows and the different hosts for a year of programming, and that you can purchase these discs, and that will have available all of the shows that have been done by your particular favorite host over the past year. And so that's one way of catching up on a lot of the shows and the information you may have missed, because I know that 1 year full worth of shows is quite a number of broadcasts. And so for those that are interested, contact Nighthawk and just let them know that whoever, myself, that we sent you, and that you are interested in supporting whoever it is and whatever show it is that you'd like to get further information on. We do have a couple questions which we're going to bring forth, and I'm going to bring Robert back on, but also I wanted to let Dr. Who know, because in the last show he had sent in a question to the chat room, and which I did not ever get a chance to answer, but he had asked me, what's the latest on Prince William being the Antichrist? I've seen a lot of convincing evidence. Just know, Dr. Who, that in 2 weeks, Dr. Joy Jeffries Pugh will be joining me on Momentary Zen, 8 to 10 p.m. Studio B on Wednesday. I believe it's March 28th, that particular week, that Wednesday, and that she has great information about all of this and will be able to detail your question and to bring up all the latest on those things that are connected to this particular topic. And so I do invite you to join us again in 2 weeks for that show, and that I will also bring this question up to her again, and so you definitely want to catch that show. But let me go ahead and ask this question, and we'll get Robert to answer. This is from In His Words. Please ask Robert Farrell, in a nutshell, what are the benefits of reading the rejected text? Is any clarity regarding the canonized text obtained? So, Robert, do you want to go ahead and answer that question?
Well, first of all, let me try to answer, first of all, is there any benefit? I would say that for Paul to be quoting the life of Adam and Eve means that I believe he thinks there's some benefit in it. For Jude to be quoting Enoch and the Assumption of Moses, I would have to assume that they see some benefit or value in these scriptures. For Matthew to be quoting some unknown source's prophecy about Jesus being called a Nazarene, I would have to think that Matthew regarded those books as important. So I think it's important for Christians and even unbelievers to realize that what we regard as a canon and what we regard as traditions, number one, is really invalid. People in the world of science, people in the world of most human endeavors regard facts as facts and regard data as data. But because Christians and other believers have a tendency to subjugate data to, objective data to subjective assessments of things, that the whole thing loses its function. It's as if the salt has lost its savor. If you cannot keep the ways of God straight, first of all, then you cannot see any of the stuff that I'm talking to you about. And if you do see any of the stuff that I'm talking to you about, and you disregard it, well, it's saying something about your disregard of what our writers of our scriptures thought. And so just for that reason alone, I would at least say that there is validity to this stuff because they seem to think so. They regarded these things as prophecy. They regarded them as scripture. They called them prophecy. They called them scripture. As for what is it possible that what we have today is corrupted or is, not the same thing or whatever? A lot of that can be answered by the fact, and I haven't gone into this yet so far, but there is a whole other dimension here that really is too complex to go into in the scope of this program. But the nutshell version of it is that there is a secret language that's mostly in terms of parallels or in similes. For example, when Paul said something like, do not be blown around by every wind of doctrine, or when Jude speaks of these infiltrators as wild waves of the sea, when Peter is referred to as the rock, and upon that rock, Jesus will build his church, and when Jesus is referred to, for example, in John 1:1 as the Word of God, well, then you take all of those elements and you see, for example, Jesus as representative of God walking across the sea. The disciples in the boat are straining against the wind. Well, if the wind is these contrary doctrines, it explains why it says that the winds were contrary, because the doctrine was contrary, you see, and that these waves, which is, again, Jude's word for these infiltrators of the church, right? When Peter is walking out towards the Logos, or towards Jesus, in other words, as long as he keeps his eyes on the Logos, he's able to transcend the sea and not sink down into it. But as soon as he pays attention to the wind and the waves, which are the false doctrines, because, again, these were contrary winds, and the waves, which are these wild waves of the sea, in other words, as Jude calls them, these infiltrators, then you begin to sense that the church took its eyes off of the Word of God and started looking at these doctrines and started looking at these false teachers instead, and sank down into the age, which is the sea. And so, in other words, it paints a picture. So it's important to recognize that there is a picture language, because then when you go to something like the Book of Enoch, and it says that there are these storage chambers of the winds, it means that they're doctrines, because, again, winds are spirits of teaching or doctrines. It means that these things are lying in store for us. And in speaking metaphorically, the rain, okay, the water of the Word, that there's an early rain, in other words, water of the Word coming down from God, and there is a latter rain, one at the end of time, where the water of the Word of God comes down from above and waters, us in the latter days. So, in other words, there is this common language. Now, when you can go through the Book of Enoch and recognize the parabolic aspect in that I've just illustrated, In other words, you realize that they're using these terms in exactly the same way. It's like you've learned a language. And now when you have these books before you, you're asking yourself, can you decode it? You're asking yourself, because therein is the common denominator between the two sets of books. They all have a heavenly meaning. Enoch even calls itself a parable. So you just start with that. You go with what you know. If you have something in hand, in other words, you will be given more. Okay, so you get a grasp on what you have within your hand. If you start to recognize the parabolic language that's in the canonical scriptures, and then you recognize that very same language in these books that were rejected, it undermines tradition. It undermines everything. In other words, it trumps everything. That knowledge of that language, that recognition of that code, for us to decode in our day and age, those of us in the latter reign, means that those that were in the early age, the early reign, laid these things down for us to find. They sealed the books until the end. Everything was couched in the language of parables. And even Barnabas says this. He says, if I were to speak to you of things to come, or things that now are, you will not understand them because they are understood in the language of parables. And so Barnabas is essentially telling you that the things that now are, in other words, the things of the times of the church are encoded in parables, and future events are encoded in parables. This is what Barnabas is saying. And he cannot go into the particulars because he can't give it away. The thing has to be buried under the earth, or in other words, disguised under earthly terminology in which the heavenly meaning is couched. And it is then, revealed at the later time in our age, so that we can take a book like Enoch and judge it, because we can understand it. And even the book of Enoch says, look, that the day will come when all the words of this book will be understood. And if you go and you read chapters 104 and 105, there's this whole thing about how scriptures are going to be given to us, and that it is our job to reveal it unto the people of the world. And that is exactly our mission. And so, yeah, therein lies the value. I don't know if I answered the whole question, but that is essentially it in a nutshell. You go into particulars of it, but that's really for another show. But by and large, that would be how you would judge that. And anything that you obviously could see did not decode would be suspect. You would have to push that aside until either somebody is given the revelation to reveal it, for us to understand it, or else it just sort of sits on the I don't know pile. But for certain books, there's just no question, because they do demonstrate that knowledge of that mystery.
Absolutely, I agree. And that's been my experience in studying them, and that's one of the things that fascinates me about them is the incredible the way that it broadens your horizons on the things that are the foundational beliefs as far as the canon. And also, in my work, I bring out how a lot of what people study and read within the canon, they don't understand just because they don't have the insight to unlock what is veiled therein. And so a lot of people are reading and studying the Bible now, and it reads like a foreign language just because they don't have the discernment and the understanding to unlock those texts and those parables and those secrets that are there contained within. And so I want to give out the call-in number for those that are interested. If you have a question or a commentary that you'd like to address Robert Farrell directly, the call-in number is 310-421-4053. We'll be taking calls till the end of the show. We have one final segment coming up, and before we, forget, Robert, I know I've asked you a couple times now, but can you speak a little bit about the Super Gospel and the other books and the texts that you've included in that? Because I know that you also cover the stories about Mary and the infancy Gospels, and can you speak on in detail some of the other books that are not well known, not well understood by listeners as to what you have there resourced and available.
Okay, well, first of all, there's a long list of books. I would have to say, 'cause you have to look beyond just what might be a whole gospel. You have patristic citations, you have a grapha of various sorts. So there are just a huge multitude of sources from which I draw. And what I did was I was very sort of indiscriminate about the way that I did this, because I didn't want there to be biases involved. And I didn't want to be like the canonizers where I just said this is good and this is bad, I believe this, I don't believe that. I didn't want to introduce my biases. So what I did was I really took everything that I had access to at the time, and to the absolute best and fullest of my ability, I commenced to integrating all of that information. And I mean, the number of books that are used is just legion. I mean, there's Acts of John, Acts of Andrew, Acts of Peter. Of course, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, I put that in there. Infancy Gospel of Thomas, Infancy Gospel of Mary, and just tons. I think that there are probably something like 80 to 100 different Gospels. So this just is so far beyond what most gospel harmonies entail. And I did it for the purposes of seeing that it either worked or it didn't work. That it either made sense or didn't make sense. It either hung together or it didn't. I forced it to sink or swim. And the way that it reads, it's very seamless, in my opinion. I didn't do a whole lot of referencing like chapter and verse. In the chapter headings, I gave you the source material. You can pull out the 2, the 3, the 4, the 12, whatever number of sources go into any particular section. And you can check for yourself to see if they work. But that was the basic idea. Was it one story? Was it a single story? Like, we would treat Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John as if they were one story. And did it extend beyond just those? And if so, what would it say? And by so doing, I think that the fact that you can read it more or less seamlessly from beginning to end is just a testimony to the fact that they are in substantial agreement, and there aren't disagreements within and among those stories that are fundamentally different from the quote-unquote disagreements that exist in the canonical stories. There are variations, and there are texts that are a little bit problematic, but this is also true in the canonical scripture. So it leads to a whole line of reasoning which goes basically like this. Are you being fair or are you not? Are you being even-handed or are you not? Are you biased or are you not? You know, I always try to be as objective as I possibly can be, just because it really goes against my grain to be biased about anything. And I wouldn't say that I was biased towards my own cause, although probably impossible not to be. But I was prepared for whatever eventuality would come of it. I was prepared for it one way or the other. You know, I didn't go in this trying to make it work. I came into it trying to give it a chance to work, and to go to whatever lengths or extent that I could within the same basic general rules and frameworks that other people who have compiled other gospel harmonies have done. You know, there are things that are a little bit moved around, but that's inevitable. Sometimes you find, like Bartimaeus, he's before Jericho in one account, and after Jericho in the other accounts. So it's a little hard to know, because you can't prefer, you know, one to the other. And so things like that are tricky, right? But that's just canonical, you know, references. Those are problems that exist in the canon. So similar problems exist with these books, but by and large, there was nothing in them that was unique. There were no problems within them that were unique to them. They have the same kinds of features and the same kinds of issues as the canonical stuff. So I was not able to detect any real inferiority of these books. And again, second of all, after having compiled it, knowing what I know about this language, which again, it's a little too complex. If somebody wants to really get into it, I would recommend reading the guidebook for the elect. That's just a series of 6 tracks that I wrote to get I don't know, it just seemed to flow. I just wrote one and I wrote the next one and just on and on and on. And now it's kind of my first foray into trying to interpret this stuff. But in any case, so having read it all the way through a number of times, really almost every day I would listen to parts of it that I had integrated, and I could understand it. Things became clearer and clearer and clearer to me as I read it, that what the story was one consistent story. And the veracity of it, it's a little hard to speak to, but I know that it hangs together. And I know that it tells a single story. And that, to me, is evidence of a spiritual relationship between these books. And for me, that's the very least I can say about it, is there seems to be harmony among the Gospels, all of them. And there seems to be substantial agreement among them and between them. And so that, I think, is the real takeaway from that. And just the very fact that it hangs together is really the evidence of its inspiration. Or at least, okay, when I speak of the super gospel, I just want to make it clear. I'm not saying it's a superior gospel. I'm saying super in the sense that it's beyond the gospel. Like to say that there's the, supersede, or the notion that is beyond, it's sort of the gospel in the whole milieu of gospels that existed at the time, a larger sense. The gospel, I guess, in its larger sense. And, and that kind of accords too with how in the book of Revelation it asserts that the gospel must again be preached before nations and tongues and kings and whatnot, because there is that sense that we have lost out on the truth, and that the truth has to be explained again.
Hey, hold on, Robert. Hold on. We're going to break. We'll be right back. Welcome back, everybody, for our final segment. I have as guest with me this evening Robert C. Farrell, who is the editor, author, and compiler of the Super Gospel, Harmony of Ancient Gospels, that you can find on Amazon, and I'll let him tell you wherever else you might be able to find this. But it's an incredible piece of work as far as just the compilation of all these different texts, many of which not a lot of people have had chance to read, have certainly not been able to study in great detail, and to have them all compiled in one book and put together in this particular way is an absolute blessing. And so I would encourage people to go out and to get it. As I said, you can find it on Amazon and probably all the other web portals, but it will introduce you and open your eyes to a lot of the extra-biblical, extra-canonical texts, things that are little known about, that have been mostly forgotten, forbidden, extricated, disappeared, and all of these texts, further elucidate and help you to understand in greater clarity as to what the patriarchs of old and the Old Testament, New Testament students and authors were studying and writing in their own lives, and what they were privileged to have access to. And again, with our being this fig tree generation and having the advent of the internet, we also have access to so many of these different texts, and I've been studying them for many, many years now. And so I would encourage others, because in my opinion, it's like we're all investigators, like we're trying to resolve a crime, and that crime being that so much of the knowledge that our ancestors were privy to we no longer have access to, not in the ways that they did, because a lot of these texts were shared among those communities of truth seekers and believers that were wanting to know more, and that different individuals that had experience, that were eyewitness to firsthand accounts as far as, the apostles and different individuals that had experience with Christ in his walk and his incarnation here while he was in flesh form, that, saw the first resurrection of the dead after his death on the cross, and that were experiencing as far as his resurrection and the teachings that he brought to the people after his death on this cross and after his 3 days in Sheol, where he took all of the previous patriarchs from Adam to the thief that died on the cross with him. They took him back into paradise for the first resurrection, and that many of these people were seen in the streets of Jerusalem that gave testimony to the Pharisees, that wrote down things like the Gospel of Nicodemus, that became, eyewitness account to his resurrection and the resurrection of others. These kind of things became Gospels and testaments and testimonies, Acts, different books that became the Acts of, secret books. All of this information has been lost. It has been forgotten, and that people, especially those that are very devout as far as in their walk and in their relationship with the Lord and the King, with our Savior Messiah, that want to know more and want to study all they can, but have no idea as to where to go to seek out further answers and to read some of these extra materials. And there is so much available. And I think that the work that Robert has done in piecing together this book, and also with the kids, he is just like myself. We both make our work available to those that cannot afford them. I know that he's done many readings where you can find the entire Super Gospel on different segments of YouTube videos that he has made freely available to the public. And myself, I'm the same way. It's not about making money or, trying to profit on these sources or on this information. It's about getting the material to you so that you can understand the gospel in a way that you may never have prior. And that we are just trying to, as Christ's example to us, to be good servants to the fellowship of those that are seeking answer and seeking guidance, seeking direction for further elucidation on all these different texts and these scriptures and these things that have been, as I said earlier, forgotten, forbidden, and eradicated, elucidated, disappeared, all these different things. And so, Robert, can you speak to as where people can go to find this information, both in book form where they can purchase the text, and also where they can go again to find it on your different YouTube and your website? And also, if you don't mind people contacting you if they have questions or would like to, just say thank you. I know you have a Facebook account, or if you'd like to share an email address or anything like that.
Okay. Well, first of all, if you want to purchase the book, again, like you said, I make it freely available. I don't make a big deal out of it, pushing it. If you want it, you can get it from scripturaltruth.com. There's a link in the book section or book section. But in any case, also it's available through Amazon.com if you want it there. I have provided a read-along version. If you actually want to watch it as you listen, I have made that available on my YouTube channel, which again is Apocryphile 1970. That's APOCRYPHILE 1970. And also the MP3s are available at scriptural-truth.com. Like I said, my friend Rick's been running that website. He did it for really the first 2 years on his own dime, because he does it all completely on his own. I did sort of give him permission to put a donate button on there because he was spending just an egregious amount of his own money. But I figure after 2 years of spending his own money and doing this all on his own dime, you know, that he deserved a little bit of support. So if you want to help him out, there is that. But yeah, I don't take donations or any of that stuff. You know, because, you know, freely you have received, and so freely you must give, and that's something that I can understand. I mean, after all, you don't. I mean, it's like Zen just said. You're on a path of self and self-discovery and discovery of the truth. God will teach you a little bit about yourself if you're sincere and if you're a good student. And he'll guide you if you follow his paths and follow his truth. You know, just following the truth of the scriptures will lead you to these conclusions, whereas negating the scriptures will lead you to other conclusions. And what I'm saying is that it's a filtering process. You know, do you possess the virtue, I guess, to follow this truth? Because if you do, then you'll realize more and more, and you'll realize that there's this whole world of truth out there that sort of is your inheritance and really your birthright. And as Zen mentioned before, you know, this is a crime. It's a crime against all of us. It is a theft. You know, the question was asked in Malachi, well, will a man rob God? Well, we have robbed God. Christianity has robbed God of his truth and of his scriptures. And when you think about it, that is really a crime above all crimes, really, to actually steal from the Creator, to actually misrepresent the words of God is a high crime. And it's something I'm very passionate about, obviously. But, I mean, that's essentially what this is about. This is really what is at stake. If you simply follow the truth as he has laid it down for us, such that an entrance to the kingdom, as it says in 2 Peter, will be generously opened unto us. You know, I can show you where that's true, and I can show you where that's the case, and I can show you where scriptures and truth and revelation, all kinds of things, just flow from agreeing with God and agreeing with the prophets. And again, I didn't start out being all about these apocryphal books. I ended up being that way because I was passionate about God's Word. And as such, I refused to trade and to barter truth for falsehood. And I think that people out there, if they realized the monster that they were really feeding, you talked about the mystery of iniquity. There's something about reading that whole chapter. When you read it in its context, he's clearly talking about the present event and the near future. Because he said that you know that he that withholdeth that he might be revealed in his time, for the mystery of iniquity doth already work. It means in Paul's day. And this is witnessed again in 3 John, where, you know, the congregation of Diotrephes wouldn't even have John or his disciples in that church. The beloved disciple wouldn't have them in his church. And Paul, again, faced so much opposition in his own day. You know, despite all of his best efforts, people turned against him, people turned back to the world. You know, he had to struggle, and he had to face these things. But that was because there was a spirit of iniquity. Anything that I could tell you now from decoding it, as I said before, was encoded. And it was encoded by people who knew perfectly well what they were doing. So it means something to pursue truth, because then you can begin to penetrate the real reasons for why the writers of the New Testament wrote the way they did, why they revealed what they did. And probably as important, you can see where people have had their hands on this. where they want to separate Jude from 2 Peter, where they want to interject something between 3 John and Revelation, so as to sort of hide their guilt. And, these teachings are like the scorpion's tails. They just keep on stinging us down through time because the traditions perpetuate themselves. And we just keep getting stung by this. Every time you see it in the New Testament, the last times is always in the present tense. These are the last days, and of course a day is 1,000 years. 1,000 years are as a day. Each 1,000 years is therefore a day. See, so these 2,000 years, in other words, are the last day. And then this mystery of iniquity will be revealed. Okay? And so, in other words, this whole lie that has been from the beginning, where they imposed the canon rather than the keys. Because, again, the keys that I was talking about earlier, like the wind is doctrine, the water is the word, that Jesus is the Logos, that Peter is the church, all of those things are keys. They're higher level meanings that are revealed through, like I said, either parallelism, similes, or some other way. There are lots of techniques, for lack of a better word, to sort of hold these words out. But once you see them and apply them, they work all the way across the board, and they cross canonical boundaries. And that's the key. That's your trump card. If you don't take away anything else from what I'm saying, there is this truth. And it does transcend all of these barriers. And that's what's important, because you realize this is how Jude could read Enoch with confidence. This is how Jude could read the Assumption of Moses with confidence. This is how Paul could read the life of Adam and Eve with confidence. This is how he could refer to the book of Jannes and Jambres with confidence. This is how he could quote the wisdom of Solomon with confidence. He had that knowledge, and he encoded his word in precisely the same terms. These terms were known in the early church. These were the keys. Now, it says in the Gospel of Thomas that the scribes and the Pharisees, for example, had taken the keys of knowledge and have hidden them. But they themselves do not go in order to allow those who wish to enter to do so. And in Luke chapter 11, it says the same thing about the lawyers, that they had taken the key of knowledge, which is to say, to understand the secret meaning. And this is for the purposes of subverting the truth. So when we see the scribes and the Pharisees doing this, when the language was then known, and then revealed to the Jews, the same tactic was adopted by the infiltrators of the church. They said, let's just do the same thing to the church. Let us go in and push the physical level, the earthly level, the flesh and blood level of everything, instead of the higher level, the heavenly level, the Christ level, the key level, the mystery level, the upper level. Instead of that message, they pushed the lower message. And that was their key to getting another 2,000 years for the devil. And the people who have followed in their footsteps, either wittingly or unwittingly, have perpetuated that same teaching. And this teaching has robbed us of our Christian heritage, the knowledge of the keys and the ability to access these documents. And we have the trump card. We hold it in our hands. It is within our power to bring the fight, if you will, to the church. Because judgment begins first at the house of God. And that's, you see, when the whole controversy erupts, which it will, because it's written in the Bible, there's nothing Satan can do about it. It's going to happen. It just depends on us to be the agents of this change. And the question is, do we have the integrity? Do we have the nerve? Do we have the guts? To be honest with you, I think it would be pretty easy to do, because we really don't have a leg to stand on. And there's a mountain of evidence that has been given to us, such that you know that they feared this information because they covered it up, because they hid it. Why do you cover up what you're not afraid of? Why do you hide what you're not guilty of? You see, it's tantamount to an admission of their own guilt when you are able to uncover what they should have delivered to us and did not.
Right.
And there's all kinds of evidence out of that throughout the New Testament. What they did quickly. If you catch what I mean. So, I mean, these people are basically Judases. And they're spoken of as such. They're spoken of as dogs. For example, in the Gospel of Thomas, the scribes and the Pharisees are like dogs atop the cattle trough. The Christians, again, they're like the pigs. There's 2,000 years left, and that symbolizes the Christian era. You see, and that's why you see dogs and pigs together all the time. Do not cast your, do not give what is sacred to dogs. In other words, to the scribes and the Pharisees, right? Do not throw pearls to swine. In other words, don't give them the treasure, because they'll just trample on it and turn around and rend you. So in other words, this is telling you what the Jews have done and would do, and what the Christians have done and would do. This is why the dog returns to its own vomit. In other words, Judaism goes back to the old teaching, and the sow, again the pig, the Christian, that was once washed, in other words, with the water of the Word, goes back to a wallowing in the mire. That is to say, mud is water of the Word mixed with the earth, the earthly teaching. So it's human traditions, right? And so it's telling you about the Jews and the Christians. It's just that people don't catch those things because they're not able to discern the keys that they're reading. They don't know how to read what is before their face. Like it says in the Gospel of Thomas, recognize what is before your face, and everything will be revealed to you. It's a matter of recognition. And at that point, we're given very simple instructions. We overcome by the blood of the Lamb, that is to say, His sacrifice for us. The sacrifice of His Spirit, His truth, all right, and the word of our testimony. So we are able to overcome by our word. So we must speak the word. We must shout it from the rooftops. This is my struggle. This is my effort to try and get people involved. My idea is not to control people and not to tell people what to think, but to try and lift the veil and give them the tools that they need to find God's inspiration in their life and to utilize the talents that God has given him. Because you never sees the... I'm sorry, go ahead.
Robert, hold on for just a second. We got the Jacker on with us. Hi, Jacker. Did you want to ask Robert a question or make a commentary? We got about 4 minutes left in the show.
Right, Robert. Zen, in his fourth book, Father of Cain, he lays out the premise that there's two seed lines that are at work on the earth, two bloodlines, and that wouldn't that theory, wouldn't that go along with the reason why all this information was hidden, that there is the dark kingdom, there is a second bloodline among us who's been hiding?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
And then before I go, because I know there's only a couple minutes left, Zen, you still have your 4-book set, and want to tell people where they can get yours, because in your book, Sons of God, you go through a lot of this information, because it's just hard from somebody like me, a fundamentalist Christian coming from a background where the Bible is the inherent Word of God. There's nothing else. You can't add one word to it. Can't take one away, or you're burning in hell forever. I mean, so, but anyways, for people that are like that and are having a hard time grappling with your information, Zen's got some...
Well, again,
go ahead.
Again, when you say don't add or you don't detract, not to interrupt you, but just for time's sake, I see where you're going with this. To not add or to not add means that when you read, for example, Jude 14, and he says that Enoch is a prophet and that he's prophesying about people coming into the church, that is a datum, and you're not supposed to take away from that either. You see what I'm saying? The fact is that all of these facts that I'm telling you are in the scriptures, and if you ignore them, that's the same as taking away.
I agree.
And as far as...
I see what you mean there. But do you believe the two bloodlines?
Okay, yeah, because Jesus says even this. He says, look, the wicked are wiser in their generation. And you think about it, he's referring to bloodline there. Than are the sons of light. Because the truth is being withheld from us, both to protect us from further guilt. Because you're accountable for what you know. So, when Jesus is on the cross, he says, forgive them, for they know not what they do. He's basically saying that forgiveness is sort of on the basis of knowledge or ignorance. And so, if he keeps us ignorant for 2,000 years, then the onus is on that generation who is, in their generation, wiser. Because they're the ones that have this knowledge, and they're the ones who suppress it. It is described in the Pharisees who take the keys of knowledge and hide them. It is those people. And he refers to them as that generation, the wicked generation, whose father is Lucifer, whose father is Satan.
Yes.
See, so in other words, he's describing this exact thing to them. So
Right.
yeah, they want to take over. They want to run the show. They're working for their father. Okay? Question is, are we working for our father? That's what we need to do. We need to work for our father. They've been working for theirs. Let's work for ours. You know, they got us all turned around because they act like they're all nice and they act like they're one of us, right? But they're not. That's why they infiltrate the church, to fool us, to deceive us, to fill the church with all kinds of people who are lukewarm and who don't care.